There's a reason the Buddha left his wife. There's a reason Jesus never married. There's a reason the greatest mystics throughout history chose solitude over partnership. And it's not what you think. The world will tell you they sacrificed love for a higher purpose, but that's not it at all. They discovered something about love that made ordinary relationships seem like a pale imitation, a cheap substitute, a counterfeit coin when you could have the real gold. And once you see what they saw, you can never go back to playing the game everyone else is playing. What I'm about to tell you isn't comfortable. It isn't what society wants you to hear. But if you're someone who suspects there's something more to existence than finding your other half and settling down, then you're exactly who needs to hear this. You see, the spiritually awake person who stays single isn't avoiding love. They found a love so vast that focusing it on one person would be like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. Think about this for a moment. When was the last time you were truly, completely alone? Not waiting for a text, not planning your next interaction, but alone in the way a mountain is alone, alone in the way the moon is alone. Have you ever tasted that? Tell me in the comments, because your answer reveals more than you might think. If you're drawn to this kind of inquiry, subscribe to this channel. We're doing something here that most people avoid their entire lives. We're waking up. Now here's the great cosmic joke that nobody tells you. We're taught from childhood that we are incomplete, that something is missing. Mother says someday you'll meet someone special. Father says when you find the right person. Movies, songs, advertisements, all singing the same tune. You are half a person looking for your other half. And nobody stops to ask the obvious question. Says who? Who decided you were half of something? Did you arrive on this planet with a label saying some assembly? Required, other half sold separately? This is what I call a hoax, a put-on, a magnificent con job. And almost everyone has fallen for it. Here's what nobody tells you. Emptiness you're trying to fill with another person isn't a hole that needs plugging. It's a doorway that needs entering. But we don't enter it. We run from it. We find someone, anyone, to stand in front of that doorway so we don't have to see what's on the other side. You've noticed this pattern. Someone goes through a breakup, and before you can say self-reflection, they're already swiping through photos of strangers, looking for the next person to hide in. Not the next person to love, the next person to hide in. And that word hide is everything. Think about how we speak about relationships. We say, I found someone, as if you were lost. We say they complete me, as if you were broken. We say I can't live without them, as if your existence depended on their presence. The language itself reveals the sickness underneath. Most people spend their entire lives bouncing from relationship to relationship like a ball in a pinball machine, never stopping long enough to ask the obvious question, what am I running from? What is so terrifying about my own company that I need constant distraction from it? The answer, when you finally face it, is both simple and devastating. You're running from yourself, from the silence that would reveal who you actually are beneath all the performances, from the emptiness that isn't really empty at all, but is so full of presence that the ego cannot survive contact with it. But here's where it gets fascinating. What I'm about to share changes the whole game. Stay with me. Let me tell you about a man I knew. I'll call him Thomas. Thomas was a professor of philosophy, which is rather ironic. He spent his days teaching people how to think clearly, and he couldn't see the most obvious thing about his own life. 23 years of marriage, described himself as happily married, which is a phrase people use when they don't want to look too closely. He came to one of my seminars because, as he said, something is missing. Isn't that fascinating? The man has everything society says you need. Spouse, family, respectable position. Is missing. So I asked him a simple question. What would happen if you spent 1 week completely alone? No wife, no colleagues, no students, just you and your own consciousness. And he said, I couldn't do that. Why not? Because I wouldn't know what to do with myself. There it is, the confession. 23 years of marriage, and he had never learned to be with himself. His wife wasn't his partner. She was his hiding place. His marriage wasn't love. It was a sophisticated strategy for avoiding the one relationship that actually matters. Now, Thomas was a brilliant man, explained Hegel and Kierkegaard with remarkable clarity. He understood the philosophy of consciousness. He taught courses on existentialism, and yet he had never spent a single week alone with his own existence. The cobbler's children have no shoes, as they say. Thomas did eventually take that week alone. He rented a small cabin in the mountains with no internet, no phone service, nothing but trees and sky and the sound of wind. The first 3 days were miserable. He described it as withdrawal, like coming off a drug. He paced. He talked to himself. He made lists of things he needed to tell his wife. He composed emails in his head that he couldn't send. His mind was desperate for its usual diet of interaction and validation. But on the 4th day, something cracked open. He described it as falling into myself. He said, for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't performing for anyone. I wasn't being husband or professor or father. I wasn't being anyone at all. I was just being. And it was terrifying. And then it was peaceful. And then it was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. What Thomas found was what every mystic has found. Beneath all the noise of relationship and responsibility, there is a silence. And in that silence, there is a presence. And that presence is what you actually are. Not your name, not your role, not your history, but the awareness in which all of that appears and disappears like clouds in an empty sky. When Thomas returned from that week, his marriage was never the same, not because he loved his wife less, but because he no longer needed her in the desperate way he had before, and she didn't know what to do with a husband who was suddenly content in his own being. The whole relationship had been built on mutual need, and when one person stops needing, the architecture collapses. Have you ever tasted this? A moment when the performance stopped, and you simply existed without reference to anyone else? Tell me about it in the comments. These moments matter more than we realize. This is what the sages understood. Most relationships are unconscious attempts to avoid the very silence that would set us free. Now let me explain what's actually happening here, because this is where it gets quite interesting. In the Eastern traditions, particularly in Zen, there's this understanding that the self you think you are, the one with a name and history and preferences and fears, is not what you fundamentally are. It's a performance, a role, a mask you've worn so long you've forgotten you put it on. The Japanese call it the small self, the ego, the social self that needs constant validation. And this small self is absolutely terrified of being alone. Because when it's alone, when there's no audience, it starts to become transparent. You start to see through it. And what do you see behind it? This is the great question. This is what the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree to discover. Behind the mask of the small self is what? Most people never find out. The moment they feel the mask becoming transparent, they panic. Grab their phone, call someone, start a new relationship. Anything to avoid seeing what's behind the mask. The ego is like the Wizard of Oz. It maintains its power only as long as you don't look behind the curtain. It projects a grand and frightening image, complete with smoke and thunder, but behind the curtain, there's just a little man pulling levers. And the ego knows that if you spend too much time alone, too much time in silence, you'll eventually peek behind the curtain. So it keeps you busy. It keeps you distracted. It keeps you in relationships that consume all your attention. But here's the cosmic joke at the heart of existence. What's behind the mask isn't frightening at all. It's actually what you've been looking for all along. The peace you seek in another person. The love you hope someone will give you. The feeling of coming home. It's all there behind the mask, waiting. You don't find it in another person. You find it in yourself. Or rather, you find that it is yourself. The love you were seeking was your own nature all along, and you were looking for it everywhere, except the one place it actually lives. The Hindus have a beautiful image for this. A man has a diamond sewn into the lining of his coat, but he's forgotten it's there. He spends his whole life begging, thinking he's poor, when all along he's carrying a fortune. He searches every corner of the earth for treasure when it's pressed against his own heart with every step he takes. This is the human condition. We are all walking around with infinite treasure sewn into our being, but we've forgotten it's there. And instead of looking inward, we look outward. We think the treasure is in another person, in their love, in their validation, in their presence. The spiritually awake person who stays single hasn't lost the diamond. They've found it. And once you find it, the desperate search for someone to complete you simply stops. Not because you've given up, but because you've arrived. Now what I'm about to explain next is where everything comes together. This is the part that changes how you see everything. With me. Here's what most people completely miss about spiritual awakening. The path is not about adding anything to yourself. It's not about finding something you don't have. It's not about becoming something you're not. The path is about removal, taking away everything that obscures what you already are. Michelangelo was asked how he created his David. He said, "I simply removed everything that wasn't David." The sculpture was always there, hidden in the marble. He just chipped away everything that wasn't it. This is exactly what spiritual awakening is. You are already the Buddha. You are already Christ consciousness. You are already the self that the Hindus speak of. But there's marble around you, layers and layers of conditioning, belief, identity, and relationship that obscure the sculpture underneath. Think about this in terms of relationship. What does relationship typically add? Expectations, obligations, compromise, the constant pressure to be something for someone else. Layer upon layer of stuff on top of who you actually are. Your partner expects you to be a certain way, so you become that way. Your partner has needs, so you shape yourself around those needs. Your partner has a vision of who you should be. You gradually, almost invisibly, start becoming that vision. And with each adaptation, each compromise, each small surrender, another layer of marble is added. I'm not saying these things are evil, but they are additions. And the spiritual path is about subtraction. This is why every genuine wisdom tradition includes periods of solitude, retreat, withdrawal from ordinary social life. Not because society is bad, but because you can only find out what you are when you strip away everything you're not. When you're in a relationship, you're constantly being who the other person needs you to be. There's no space to discover who you are when no one needs you to be anything. The Taoists understood this profoundly. They talked about Wu Wei, effortless action, non-doing, the art of getting out of your own way and letting life move through you without resistance. You cannot practice Wu Wei when someone is constantly asking you to do something. You cannot rest in your natural being when you're perpetually responding to another person's needs, expectations, and emotions. There's a story about a Taoist sage who was asked why he lived alone in the mountains. And he said, "When I am with people, I am pulled in 10,000 directions. Each person wants something from me. Each interaction requires me to become something. But here, alone with the pine trees and the clouds, I am not required to be anything at all. In that freedom from becoming, I discover what I have always been." Lao Tzu lived alone in the mountains. Buddha left his wife and child to sit alone under a tree. Jesus went into the desert for 40 days. The pattern is unmistakable. Awakening happens in solitude. Not because you must hate people, but because to find what you are, you must remove everything that tells you what you're supposed to be. And here's the strange paradox. Once you've found what you are, you can be with people more fully than ever before. Because you're no longer performing, you're no longer needing, you're no longer using them to hide from yourself. You're simply present completely as what you've discovered yourself to be. Let me tell you about a woman named Catherine, because her story shows the other side of this. Catherine was a psychotherapist, spent her days helping others with their relationships while being utterly dependent on her own. 3 engagements, 3 collapses, the same pattern every time. She would become anxious, clinging, desperate. The men would pull away. She would fall into depression. Then find another man and repeat the whole thing. She was what the psychology books call anxiously attached, always scanning for signs of rejection, always trying to secure the bond, always one step away from panic. She came to me wanting to understand why she couldn't make relationships work. I told her something she did not want to hear. I said, "Catherine, you don't have a relationship problem. You have a self problem. You're terrified of being alone with yourself and use men as shields against that terror." She argued, defended herself, explained why her relationships failed, and none of it had anything to do with her. It was the men. They were avoidant. They were afraid of commitment. They couldn't handle a strong woman. But something landed. Because 6 months later, she wrote me a letter. She decided to take a year off from dating. No men, no romance, no dating apps, no keeping her options open. Just her. The first few months were what she called agony. She described feeling like an addict in withdrawal. Her hand would reach for her phone to check for messages from men who weren't there. She would catch herself scanning rooms for potential partners. The habit of looking for someone to complete her was so deep it felt like it was wired into her nervous system. But she stayed with it, and somewhere around month 4, something shifted. She wrote, "For the first time I met myself without a mirror. I had always seen myself through men's eyes. Am I attractive enough? Am I good enough? Am I worthy? When I removed the mirrors, I had to ask, who am I when no one is looking?" What Catherine found was that she wasn't the needy, desperate person her relationships made her. That was a performance. A character she played in response to the terror of being alone. Behind it was someone far more interesting, creative, funny, sharp, independent. Someone she had never met because there was always a man in the way. She discovered that she had been outsourcing her sense of worth to men her entire adult life. If they loved her, she was valuable. If they rejected her, she was worthless. Her entire identity was borrowed. And when you live on borrowed identity, you are always one rejection away from total collapse. In Solitude, she had to generate her own sense of worth. She had to find value in her own being, not in someone else's opinion of her being. And this, she said, was the hardest and most liberating thing she had ever done. Catherine stayed single for 3 years. When I last spoke to her, she had entered a relationship, but it was completely different. She said, "I'm not looking for him to complete me. I'm already complete. We're just enjoying each other." That's the difference. That's what solitude makes possible. Not the avoidance of relationship, but the transformation of what relationship can be. As you're hearing this, what's clicking for you? What are you seeing that you didn't see before? Tell me in the comments. Now I want to talk about something that Carl Jung understood perhaps better than anyone. And it's absolutely crucial for understanding why the spiritually awake often stay single. Jung talked about what he called projection. This is the unconscious process by which we take parts of ourselves that we haven't integrated, that we don't recognize as our own, and we see them in other people instead. Every man carries within him what Jung called the anima, the feminine principle. Every woman carries within her the animus, the masculine principle. And in most people, these contrasexual elements are unconscious. They're hidden in what Jung called the shadow. Now here's what happens in romantic love. When a man falls in love with a woman, what he's often actually doing is projecting his anima onto her. He sees in her all the feminine qualities he hasn't developed in himself. The sensitivity, the intuition, the emotional depth, capacity for relationship. He doesn't see her. He sees his own unconscious feminine reflected back at him. And she's doing the same thing. She projects her animus onto him. She sees in him the strength, the decisiveness, the clarity, the protective power that she hasn't developed in herself. She doesn't see him. She sees her own unconscious masculine wearing his face. And they call this love. But it's not love. It's mutual projection. It's two people using each other as screens for their own unconscious content. And it feels wonderful at first because you're encountering parts of yourself that you've never met. You feel more whole. You feel complete. The missing pieces seem to have been found. But the problem is that the projection always, eventually, falls away. Can't project forever. Reality has a way of intruding. When you finally see the person behind the projection, you feel disillusioned. You feel betrayed. You say you've changed, or this isn't the person I fell in love with. They haven't changed, just stopped projecting. This is why most relationships end in disappointment. Not because people choose the wrong partners, but because the whole thing was based on projection from the start. You fell in love with parts of yourself and blamed another person when the mirror cracked. Jung's solution to this was individuation, the process of integrating the unconscious, taking back the projections, developing within yourself all the qualities you've been seeking in others. A man must develop his own feminine. A woman must develop her own masculine, and both must integrate their shadow, the rejected parts of themselves they don't want to acknowledge. And here's the thing. This process is extremely difficult to do in relationship, because relationship thrives on projection. The magic of romance depends on not seeing clearly. The whole game requires you to keep parts of yourself hidden so they can be projected onto others. The person who stays single has an enormous advantage in this process. There's no screen for projection. There's no one to blame for your unconscious content. There's no one to carry the parts of yourself you don't want to own. You're forced to face your own shadow directly. All the neediness, all the fear, all the desperate grasping that Catherine discovered in herself, she could only see it clearly when there was no man to distract her from it. In relationship, she could always externalize the problem. He's avoidant, he's afraid, he's the problem. But alone, there was nowhere to hide. The problem was obviously, unavoidably, undeniably her own. Jung called the shadow the seat of creativity. He said that everything you reject about yourself, everything you push into the darkness, contains enormous energy. And when you integrate the shadow, that energy becomes available to you. You become more whole, more creative, more alive. But you cannot integrate what you cannot see, and you cannot see what you're projecting onto someone else. This is the gift of solitude. This is why the spiritually awake stay single long enough to do this work. Not because they're avoiding relationship, but because they're doing the work that makes genuine relationship possible. Now let me bring this home in practical terms, because philosophy that doesn't touch daily life is merely entertainment. What does this understanding mean for how you actually live? It means that the next time you feel the urge to reach out to someone, not because you have something to share, but because you can't bear the silence, you pause. You ask, what am I running from? What is in this silence that frightens me? It means that when you feel lonely, you look more carefully at that feeling. Is it really loneliness? Or is it something else wearing loneliness as a mask? Often what we call loneliness is actually the beginning of self-encounter. It's the ego's alarm bell going off because it's losing its audience. Think about what loneliness actually is. It's not the absence of people. You can feel lonely in a crowd. You can feel lonely in a marriage. Loneliness is the sense that something is missing, that you are incomplete, that you need something from outside yourself to be whole. But what if that sense of something missing is itself a mistake? What if it's a signal not that you need another person, but that you haven't yet discovered what you already have? This is the reframe that changes everything. Loneliness becomes not a problem to be solved by finding someone, but a doorway to be entered. The ache of incompleteness becomes not evidence that you need a partner, but evidence that you haven't yet met yourself. Means you begin to treat solitude not as a problem to be solved, but as a practice to be cultivated. The way you practice music or meditation. Solitude is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with practice. Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said the most important thing is to find out what is the most important thing. You cannot find this out while managing someone else's emotions. You cannot discover your depths while swimming in the shallows of constant social interaction. I'm not suggesting you move to a cave, but you need space, real space. Time when you are completely, utterly alone, when no one is watching, when no one is waiting, when no one needs anything from you. Start with an hour, then a day, then a weekend, then a week. Increase the dose gradually the way you would build any capacity. Your ability to be with yourself is a muscle. If you've never exercised it, it will be weak at first, but it gets stronger with use. In that space, something can happen that cannot happen anywhere else. You meet yourself, not the self you perform for others, not the self you've been told you are, but the self that was there before anyone told you anything at all. The self that doesn't need validation because it is validation itself. If this is opening something in you, subscribe to this channel. There are more of us than you think. People who are done with the surface and ready for the depths. But here's what most people miss. And this is the deepest part. Changes everything. When you truly enter solitude, not the painful. Loneliness of someone who wishes they had company, but the spacious aloneness of someone who has discovered. They are complete. something extraordinary happens. You realize you're not alone at all, not in the sense of having company, but in a much more profound sense, the feeling of being separate from everything else, separate from other people, from nature, from the universe itself. This feeling is part of the illusion. It comes with the small self, with the ego, with the mask. When the mask becomes transparent, the separation dissolves. And what's left? This is what all the mystics have been trying to tell us in their various ways. The Hindus call it Atman Brahman. Your innermost self and the ultimate reality of the universe are one and the same. The Buddhists call it Buddha nature, the awakened consciousness that is your true identity. The Taoists call it being one with the Tao. The Sufi poet Rumi said, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop." The Christian mystics spoke of the ground of the soul, where there is no distinction between the soul and God. The Zen masters point to your original face, the face you had before your parents were born. All of them are saying the same thing in different languages. What you really are is not a separate self floating through an alien universe. What you really are is the universe itself, temporarily pretending to be a separate self. You are not a stranger in a strange land. You are the land, dreaming that it's a stranger. You cannot reach this while focused on another person. You cannot discover your identity with the whole while preoccupied with one particular part. Romance keeps your attention narrowed, focused, fixated on one small corner of existence. What you need is expansion. Your attention must become wide enough to include everything. This is why the spiritually awake stay single, not because they're running from love, because they've found a love so vast no single person could contain it. They have fallen in love with existence itself, with morning light through the window, with the sound of rain, with the simple miracle of being conscious at all. When you look at a sunset, really look at it, without thinking about what it means or what you should photograph for social media. There is no separation between you and the sunset. There is just seeing, one process, one event. The sunset is not something you are experiencing, it's something you are doing. You are sunsetting. The same is true of everything. When you really listen to music, there is no listener and music. There is just hearing, one event. When you really taste food, there is no taster and taste, just tasting. The separation we feel between ourselves and the world is not actually there. It's added by thought, by the mental process of dividing the world into subject and object, self and other. And romantic relationship, by its very nature, reinforces this division. There is me and there is my partner. There is my needs and their needs. There is my territory and shared territory. The constant negotiation of two separate selves trying to coexist. But when you are truly alone, when you stop creating the boundary between self and other, a remarkable thing happens. You are intimate with everything, the trees, the sky, the sound of wind, your own breath. Everything becomes your beloved. Everything becomes home. How can you narrow that down to one person? It's like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. The love that the awakened person discovers is not smaller than romantic love. It's infinitely larger. And here's the beautiful paradox. The person who discovers this vast love becomes capable of loving individuals more truly than before, because their love doesn't come from need. It flows naturally, freely, without agenda, like sunlight, like water. It doesn't grasp because it doesn't need. It doesn't cling because it doesn't fear loss. The single person who has awakened isn't avoiding love. They're drowning in it. So full of it, they don't need to extract it from another person. They become a source of love rather than a consumer of it. And there's one more piece to this that might be the most important thing I'll say today. What happens when you really get this? Stay with me. Let me tell you about a third person, because his story illustrates what becomes possible on the other side of this transformation. His name was Michael. He was a musician, 47 years old when I met him. He had been single for 12 years by choice. When people asked him why he didn't have a partner, he would smile and say, "I have 10,000 partners." They thought he was joking or bragging about romantic conquests. He wasn't. Michael had gone through a profound awakening in his 30s, a dark night of the soul, triggered by the end of his marriage and the death of his father in the same year. Everything he had built his identity on collapsed at once. Husband, son, successful man, all gone. He spent 2 years in what he called the wilderness, living alone, playing music alone, walking alone, sitting alone, learning for the first time in his life to be with himself without distraction. And what he discovered changed everything. He said, "I realized that my whole life I had been trying to get love from the outside. From my wife, from my audiences, from my parents. I was like a cup with a hole in the bottom, constantly trying to fill myself from external sources, never realizing that the hole meant I could never be filled that way." In solitude, he stopped trying to fill the cup from outside, and he discovered something astonishing. The cup was not a cup at all. It was a spring. Love was not something he needed to receive. It was something that flowed naturally from what he was when he stopped blocking it. He said, "Now everywhere I go, I'm in love. With the barista who makes my coffee, with the trees outside my window, with the elderly man who sits in the park feeding pigeons, with the music that moves through me when I play. It's all one love. It's all one relationship. And it never ends because it's not dependent on any one person." This is what he meant by 10,000 partners. He wasn't celibate. He had intimate connections with people, but they came from overflow, not from need. He wasn't trying to get something. He was sharing something that was already full. And here's what was remarkable. People were drawn to him like moths to a flame, because there is nothing more attractive than someone who doesn't need you, nothing more magnetic than a person who is already complete. His relationships, when he had them, were extraordinary because they were free. Neither person was trying to extract something from the other. Neither was using the other to avoid themselves. They were just two full beings spilling over into each other. This is what becomes possible on the other side of solitude. Not the avoidance of connection, but connection without desperation. Love without clinging. Intimacy without fear. I must be honest with you. There's a price to pay for this understanding. Once you see through the illusion of incompleteness, you can't unsee it. You'll watch people desperately clinging to each other, calling it love, and you'll see the fear underneath. You'll watch them lose themselves in relationships, thinking they're finding themselves, and you'll feel a kind of tender sadness. You'll lose the ability to participate in certain games. The game of romantic pursuit. The game of you complete me. These games will seem absurd, like watching adults play with toys, completely convinced the toys are real. Some relationships will end, not dramatically, but they'll become transparent. You'll see that what you thought was love was actually need, and once you no longer need, the basis for the relationship evaporates. You'll outgrow people you once thought you'd be with forever. There will be days when you wish you could go back, when the freedom feels too vast, when you long for the comfortable prison of ordinary relationship, when you want to be held and told that you matter, when the loneliness of seeing clearly feels unbearable. The awakened person is like someone who has sobered up at a party where everyone else is drunk. You can't participate in the drunkenness anymore. You can't unsee the staggering and slurring. You can't pretend the conversation is profound when it's just noise. And sometimes, frankly, it would be nice to get drunk again, to lose yourself in the fantasy, to believe that this person, this relationship, will finally make you whole. But you can't. Once you've seen, you've seen. But here's what you gain, and it's worth everything you lose. Nobody can take from you, not freedom to do whatever you want. That's the ego's idea of freedom. I mean freedom from the desperate need that keeps most people running in circles. Freedom from the exhausting search for completion. Freedom from the fear that you are not enough on your own. Peace. Not the peace of getting what you want. The peace of no longer needing anything to be different. The peace of resting in your own being complete as you are. The peace that the Buddhists call nirvana and the Christians call the peace that passes understanding. And love, real love. Love that doesn't need. Love that doesn't cling. Love that flows like water and shines like sunlight, asking nothing in return. Love that is not an emotion or an experience, but the very nature of what you are. This love cannot be gained through relationship. It can only be discovered in solitude. And once discovered, it transforms every relationship you'll ever have. Now, I know some of you are resisting this. The mind is putting up objections. But Alan, humans are social creatures. We need connection. Evolution designed us for pair bonding. Relationship is natural. And I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not saying connection is wrong. I'm not saying you should avoid people forever. I'm saying that desperate, grasping, needy connection based on "I am incomplete without you" is an illusion. It cannot give you what you're looking for, because what you're looking for isn't in another person. It's in you. The question is not whether you will be in relationship. The question is what kind of relationship you will be in. Will it be a relationship of two fragments trying to become whole? Will it be a relationship of two whole beings celebrating their wholeness? Most people never have the second kind because they've never done the work of becoming whole. They jump from relationship to relationship, fragment seeking fragment, need meeting need, wound rubbing against wound. And they call it love. The person who has done the work of solitude, who has faced their own shadow, who has discovered that they are already complete, this person is capable of a relationship most people cannot even imagine. A relationship without need, a relationship without fear, a relationship that adds to two full lives rather than trying to create one full life. Empty ones. The very fact that you've listened this long means something in you knows this is true. Beneath the resistance, beneath the objections, something recognizes what I'm pointing to. That recognition is itself the beginning of awakening. You don't have to figure anything out. Just keep looking in the direction we've been pointing. The understanding comes on its own like dawn after a long night. If this made you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is often the first sign something real is happening. The ego is comfortable, the soul is not. So when we put this together, what do we have? The recognition that searching for completion in another person is based on the illusion that you're incomplete. The understanding that most relationships are unconscious strategies for avoiding self-encounter. The insight that solitude isn't a problem but a practice, not a punishment but an opportunity. The realization that behind the mask of the social self is something infinite, a consciousness that is one with all existence. And the liberating truth that the love you seek in another person is already your own nature waiting to be discovered. The spiritually awake stay single not because they've failed at relationship, because they've succeeded at something more fundamental. They've discovered who they actually are. And in that discovery, the desperate search for completion simply ends, not with disappointment, but with arrival, not with giving up, but with waking up. This doesn't mean they'll never be in relationship. Some of them will, but their relationships will be utterly different. Not two incomplete beings trying to become whole, two whole beings celebrating their wholeness. Not two cups trying to fill each other, two springs overflowing into each other. The relationship that becomes possible after awakening is infinitely more beautiful than the relationships that keep you asleep. Because it's free, it's chosen. It's not contaminated by need. If your mind is moving in new directions, subscribe to this channel. We're exploring these territories together, and there's much more to discover. So here's my final question for you. What are you using other people for? Not the pretty story about love and connection, but underneath that, what are you actually using them for? Are you using them to validate your existence, to avoid your own company, to run from the silence that would show you what you are, to fill a hole that doesn't actually exist? Or are you meeting them freely, openly, without agenda, from a place of wholeness that needs nothing from them at all? This is the question, and you can only answer it honestly in solitude, when no one is watching, when no one needs you to be anything, when you are finally completely, utterly alone with what you actually are. I'm not asking you to answer it now. I'm asking you to live with it, to let it follow you into your next interaction, to let it whisper in your ear the next time you reach for your phone, the next time you feel lonely, the next time you think you've found the one. What are you really looking for? And where does it actually live? After everything we've explored, what will you carry with you? What has landed? Tell me in the comments. If this has touched something real in you, subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Not because I need the numbers, but because there are people out there aching for this understanding, and algorithms only work when you work with them. The great secret is that you were never looking for another person. You were looking for yourself. And that self is not something you find through relationship. It's what remains when relationship falls away. It's what was there before anyone told you that you were incomplete. It's what will be there when everyone else is gone. You are not half of anything waiting to be made whole. You are the whole thing pretending to be a half playing a game you've forgotten you're playing. The moment you remember, really remember, the game ends. Not with loss, but with laughter. The cosmic joke reveals itself. It was there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting for you to stop searching long enough to see it. The love you wanted was your own nature. The home you sought was your own being. The completion you craved was always already the case. You just had to stop running long enough to notice. Stay curious. Stay alone sometimes. And above all, stay awake. Until next time.